Darius Hall sat in a courtroom that seemed colder than the February air outside, wearing the same wrinkled suit he had been arrested in. The scent of old wood, dust, and something heavier, a smell that seemed to carry betrayal, hung in the air. Across from him was the woman he had once believed would be the love of his life, his wife Camille. She was not here to defend him, to stand by him through the hardest moment of his life. She was here to condemn him, to give testimony that would paint him as a man who had fallen from grace, a man who had returned to dealing drugs behind the façade of a youth mentor. The words she gave to the court held weight, and each one cut deeper than the last. The jurors watched her with sympathetic eyes, absorbing her every statement as if it were fact. The prosecutor framed Darius as a man leading a double life, respectable in public but dangerous in private. The jury believed it, and in that belief, Darius's life was torn in two. Years earlier, when Darius was just 26, his life had been on a much different path. He was working as a youth counselor in Charlotte, North Carolina, spending his days at a community center on the east side of the city. It was work he felt called to do, helping kids steer clear of the mistakes he himself had made as a teenager. When he was 18, Darius had been arrested for possession of a small amount of drugs, nothing large scale, but enough to get him a short jail sentence and the stigma that followed. That time behind bars had been enough for him to make a vow never to return. He stuck to that vow. He got a job, went back to school, earned certifications in youth counseling, and poured his energy into turning his story into an example for the kids he mentored. His life was simple: worn sneakers, an aging Nissan Altima, no flashy jewelry, but it was honest. Meeting Camille seemed like a turning point toward building something lasting. She was 28, a nurse assistant at Presbyterian Medical, neat in appearance and soft-spoken with a quiet grace that drew people in. Their first meeting was at a community health fair, and from there their relationship grew quickly. Within months they were living together, and by 6 months they were married in a simple courthouse ceremony. For a while things seemed steady, but marriage revealed cracks that had not been visible during their courtship. Camille became distant, less engaged, and emotionally guarded. Her connection with Tony Lattimore began during this time. Tony, an ER nurse, was everything Camille was not: bold, assertive, and unafraid to stand out. Camille mentioned her new co-worker casually at first, but over time, the friendship began to change the dynamic in her marriage. Camille started coming home later, spending time away from Darius without explanation, and becoming more secretive. The emotional distance between husband and wife widened, and it became clear she was not just struggling with work stress. Camille and Tony's friendship deepened into a romantic relationship, and with that came the problem Camille could not see an easy way to solve. Leaving her marriage would mean answering difficult questions from her religious family and her wider community. It would mean revealing parts of herself she had kept hidden. Rather than face the scrutiny and potential judgment, Camille stayed in the marriage but began to consider ways to remove herself without blame. With Tony's influence, a plan began to take shape, one that would not only end her marriage but eliminate Darius from her life entirely. Tony had connections to people who operated outside the law. Through one of these contacts, she and Camille obtained enough illegal substances to destroy a man's reputation. They packaged them carefully, ensuring there would be no trace leading back to them, and hid them until the moment was right. That moment came when Darius left his car parked outside a barbershop while getting a haircut. Camille, with a spare key, slipped away from work on her lunch break, placed the drugs in the trunk beneath the spare tire, and left without drawing attention. Later, an anonymous tip was made to police, alleging Darius was selling drugs to children at the youth center. Days later, while driving home from work, Darius was pulled over. He had no reason to suspect anything serious, but the officers conducted a search of his vehicle. When they opened the trunk and found the hidden stash, his life changed in an instant. He was arrested on the spot, bewildered and insisting the drugs were not his. Back at the station, he learned that Camille had already spoken to authorities, telling them she suspected him of being involved in illegal activity and claiming to have seen suspicious items in his belongings. The trial moved quickly. The prosecution used his prior conviction to argue a pattern of behavior, framing him as someone who had simply returned to old habits. Camille's testimony as a tearful, concerned spouse carried significant weight with the jury. Combined with the physical evidence, it left little room for doubt in their minds. Darius was found guilty of possession with intent to distribute and sentenced to 15 years in prison, with no parole eligibility for the first 12. Prison was a harsh reality. At Caldwell Correctional, he learned quickly that survival required vigilance and adaptation. In his first week, he was attacked in the showers, sustaining broken ribs and losing a tooth. He kept his head down after that, speaking only when necessary, taking on janitorial work and spending time in the library or gym to stay out of trouble. Nights were the hardest, the silence of his cell filled with memories of the life he had lost. He wrote to Camille at first, asking for explanations, sending birthday wishes, and expressing hope for reconciliation. None of those letters were answered. By the second year, he stopped trying. As the years passed, Darius endured the loss of his mother, who died of a heart attack. The news was delivered without ceremony, and his request to attend her funeral was denied due to his sentence. That loss deepened his isolation. By his 9th year, Darius had withdrawn from most outside contact. But news still traveled within the prison, and one day he overheard someone mention that Camille was living in Georgia with another woman. It did not take long for him to confirm that the woman was Tony. The revelation did not come with a burst of rage, but with a cold clarity. He began to think differently, to plan quietly. He understood that when he eventually left prison, he would not be returning to his old life. When year 15 arrived, Darius walked out of Caldwell Correctional a changed man. The guards saw just another inmate completing his sentence, but inside he carried a sense of purpose sharpened by every day of confinement. He had no welcome party, no one waiting for him. With just over $1,000 saved from prison work, he rented a small room in a rundown neighborhood and bought a cheap phone. His goal was not to rebuild in the traditional sense. It was to find Camille and understand why she had done what she did. This was the point where his focus narrowed to a single mission. He reached out to a private investigator, giving him the only piece of information he still had: her name. In the weeks that followed, the investigator returned with confirmation that Camille was now using the last name Lattimore, living in Savannah, married to Tony, and working in healthcare management. They owned a home in a comfortable neighborhood, far removed from the world Darius had known for the past decade and a half. She was also raising a child conceived through IVF, living the kind of life that projected stability and success. What struck Darius most was the contrast. While his life had been defined by the walls and routines of prison, hers had been shaped by freedom, family, and career advancement. The imbalance of those realities fueled the determination that would carry him into the next phase of his journey, a phase that would not be about confrontation in the traditional sense, but about uncovering and exposing the truth. Darius left the confrontation with Camille carrying more than just unanswered questions. He carried a renewed sense of purpose. For years, his life had been defined by the walls of a cell and the weight of a conviction that should never have existed. Now standing on the streets of Savannah, he was free in body but tethered to the task of exposing the truth. His movements became calculated. He kept his presence in the city quiet, choosing to avoid any place where people from his past might immediately recognize him. Instead, he started observing from the edges, watching, listening, piecing together the life Camille had built on a foundation of betrayal. He knew this wasn't a fight won in a single confrontation. It was a war fought in small, deliberate steps, each one designed to chip away at the carefully curated image she had created. He began with the hospital where she worked, learning the routines, the shifts, the social circles. While he never approached anyone directly at first, his mere presence near familiar spaces planted subtle questions. Over time, people noticed the man who came and went, always watching but never lingering too long. Whispers traveled faster than facts, and soon, Camille's once solid reputation began to carry shadows. Meanwhile, Darius used the quiet hours of the night to reach out to people who had been in his life before everything went wrong. Some were hesitant to get involved, still fearful of the repercussions of challenging Camille's story, but a few remembered the man he had been before the trial and offered fragments of information. He learned about changes in her employment history, moments when she had taken sudden leaves of absence, and minor conflicts with colleagues that had gone unnoticed outside of workplace gossip. These were small pieces, but to Darius, they were the beginning of a pattern that could be used to question her credibility. He funneled this information to select contacts in the local media, knowing that the right reporter could plant seeds of doubt more effectively than any direct accusation. The first real shift came when a small community paper ran a feature questioning the fairness of past convictions in the state, citing Darius's case as one example without naming Camille directly. It wasn't an expose, but it was enough to make people start asking quiet questions. At the hospital, those whispers turned into side glances and polite but cautious interactions. Darius noticed that Camille began leaving work more quickly, avoiding lingering in the parking lot or chatting with co-workers. The image of calm control she had maintained for years was starting to crack. He didn't push immediately. He had learned the value of patience during his time inside. Instead, he let the pressure build, knowing that over time, people under stress often reveal more than they intend. It was during this period that he began expanding his network beyond Savannah. He contacted advocacy groups specializing in wrongful convictions, sharing only the bare facts and avoiding any language that could be dismissed as personal revenge. His story caught the attention of one small legal nonprofit that agreed to review his case files. While they made no promises, their involvement added another layer of quiet legitimacy to his efforts. Camille could ignore him, but she couldn't easily ignore the growing awareness among professionals who had the means to dig into the past. This was never going to be a courtroom retrial, but it could become a trial in the court of public opinion, and that was where Darius was starting to win. The turning point came unexpectedly. A larger regional news outlet picked up the wrongful conviction angle, this time including enough detail that it was clear to anyone who knew the history who they were talking about. While the article didn't accuse Camille outright, it highlighted inconsistencies between her testimony and original police records, discrepancies that had gone unchallenged during the trial. For the first time, strangers were making connections, linking the respected nurse manager in Savannah to a story that didn't match the clean narrative she had presented for years. The fallout was immediate. Patients began requesting reassignment. A few parents quietly questioned her involvement in community health programs. Tony, protective and outspoken, attempted to defend her publicly, but each attempt only brought more attention to the growing controversy. The tension between them became visible to those around them, and in close-knit communities, visible tension always invites speculation. Darius didn't need to press further. The cracks were widening on their own. Still, he stayed consistent, never gloating, never losing his calm. This wasn't about revenge in the form of loud confrontation. It was about ensuring that she would never again enjoy the comfort of unquestioned trust. Over the following months, Camille's professional standing declined. She was placed on leave pending review, a phrase that in her field often signals the end of a career. The life she had built, once so polished, was unraveling piece by piece. Even with these victories, Darius knew he had to prepare for the reality that full exoneration might never come. Legal systems move slowly, and wrongful conviction cases often end without the resolution the innocent deserve. But for him, this was about balance, restoring enough of the truth to remove the weight of complete silence from his shoulders. He had already begun working with the nonprofit to compile his story into a detailed case study, something that could serve as a resource for others facing similar battles. In the quiet moments, Darius reflected on what had been taken from him. The years lost, the opportunities missed, the relationships that had faded into nothing. No amount of public doubt cast on Camille could give those back. But what it could do was ensure that the narrative she had controlled for so long was no longer the only one people heard. She could deny, deflect, and hide behind the respectability she had carefully built, but the seed of doubt was planted, and it would grow in ways neither of them could predict. For Camille, the consequences were no longer abstract. Friends she had known for years began to create distance. Invitations slowed, conversations felt shorter, and even Tony's unwavering loyalty seemed strained. Every interaction carried the weight of unspoken suspicion, and in a world where reputation was everything, that weight was heavy. For Darius, the road ahead remained uncertain, but it was no longer without direction. He continued to live quietly, focusing on rebuilding small aspects of his life that had nothing to do with the case. He found work with a community program in another city, one that valued his experience as someone who had navigated the justice system firsthand. Though his days of direct confrontation were behind him, the work of keeping the truth alive never stopped. He kept records, saved articles, and maintained contact with the people willing to listen. In the end, this story became more than just the account of one man's wrongful conviction. It was a reminder of how betrayal can destroy lives, how lies can be given the weight of law, and how resilience can chip away at even the most carefully constructed falsehoods. For Darius, justice wasn't a single moment. It was a long, deliberate process of reclaiming the space his accuser had stolen. The damage could never be fully undone, but the balance could be shifted. And in that shift, he found his version of closure. Stories like this remind us how easily truth can be twisted and how long it can take for it to find its way back into the light. If you believe more people need to hear about cases like this, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you'll never miss when we uncover the next untold story.